A.2.3. Are anarchists in favor of organization? Yes, without association, a truly human life is impossible. Liberty cannot exist without society and organization. As George Barrett pointed out, open quote, "To get the full meaning out of life, we must cooperate, and to cooperate, we must make agreements with our fellow men. But to suppose that such agreements mean a limitation of freedom is surely an absurdity. On the contrary, they are the exercise of our freedom." If we are going to invent a dogma that to make agreements is to damage freedom, then at once freedom becomes tyrannical, for it forbids men to take the most ordinary, everyday pleasures. For example, I cannot go for a walk with my friend because it is against the principle of liberty that I should agree to be at a certain place at a certain time to meet him. I cannot in the least extend my own power beyond myself, because to do so I must cooperate with someone else, and cooperation implies an agreement, and that is against liberty. It will be seen at once that this argument is absurd. I do not limit my liberty, but simply exercise it when I agree with my friend to go for a walk. If, on the other hand, I decide from my superior knowledge that it is good for my friend to take exercise, and therefore I attempt to compel him to go for a walk, then I begin to limit freedom. This is the difference between free agreement and government." End quote. As far as organization goes, anarchists think that, open quote, "far from creating authority, it is the only cure for it, and the only means whereby each of us will get used to taking an active and conscious part in collective work and cease being passive instruments in the hands of leaders." End quote. Thus, anarchists are well aware of the need to organize in a structured and open manner. As Carol Ehrlich points out, while anarchists, open quote, aren't opposed to structure and simply want to abolish hierarchical structure, they are almost always stereotyped as wanting no structure at all. This is not the case for organizations that would build in accountability, diffusion of power among the maximum number of persons, task rotation, skill sharing, and the spread of information and resources are based on good social anarchist principles of organization. End quote. The fact that anarchists are in favor of organization may seem strange at first, but it is understandable. Open quote, "For those with experience only of authoritarian organization," argue two British anarchists, "it appears that organization can only be totalitarian or democratic, and that those who disbelieve in government must, by that token, disbelieve in organization at all. That is not so." End quote. In other words, because we live in a society in which virtually all forms of organization are authoritarian, this makes them appear to be the only kind possible. What is usually not recognized is that this mode of organization is historically conditioned, arising within a specific kind of society, one whose motive principles are domination and exploitation. According to archaeologists and anthropologists, this kind of society has only existed for about 5,000 years, having appeared with the first primitive states based on conquest and slavery, in which the labor of slaves created a surplus which supported a ruling class. Prior to that time, for hundreds of thousands of years, human and proto-human societies were what Murray Bookchin calls organic, that is, based on cooperative forms of economic activity involving mutual aid, free access to productive resources, and a sharing of the products of communal labor according to need. Although such societies probably had status rankings based on age, there were no hierarchies in the sense of institutionalized dominance-subordination relations enforced by coercive sanctions and resulting in class stratification involving the economic exploitation of one class by another. It must be emphasized, however, that anarchists do not advocate going back to the Stone Age. We merely note that since the hierarchical authoritarian mode of organization is a relatively recent development in the course of human social evolution, there is no reason to suppose that it is somehow fated to be permanent. We do not believe that human beings are genetically programmed for authoritarian, competitive, and aggressive behavior, as there is no credible evidence to support this claim. On the contrary, such behavior is socially conditioned or learned, and as such, can be unlearned. See Ashley Montagu, The Nature of Human Aggression. We are not fatalists or genetic determinists, but believe in free will, which means that people can change the way they do things, including the way they organize society. And there is no doubt that society needs to be better organized, because presently most of its wealth, which is produced by the majority, and power gets distributed to a small elite minority at the top of the social pyramid, causing deprivation and suffering for the rest, particularly for those at the bottom. Yet, because this elite controls the means of coercion through its control of the state, it is able to suppress the majority and ignore its suffering, a phenomenon that occurs on a smaller scale within all hierarchies. Little wonder, then, that people within authoritarian and centralized structures come to hate them as a denial of their freedom. As Alexander Bergman puts it, open quote, "Anyone who tells you that anarchists don't believe in organization is talking nonsense. Organization is everything, and everything is organization. The whole of life is organization, conscious or unconscious. But there is organization and organization. Capitalist society is so badly organized that its various members suffer. Just as when you have a pain in some part of you, your whole body aches and you are ill. Not a single member of the organization or union may with impunity be discriminated against, suppressed, or ignored. To do so would be the same as to ignore an aching tooth. You would be sick all over." End quote. Yet this is precisely what happens in capitalist society, with the result that it is, indeed, sick all over. For these reasons, anarchists reject authoritarian forms of organization and instead support associations based on free agreement. Free agreement is important because, in Bergman's words, open quote, "Only when each is a free and independent unit, cooperating with others from his own choice because of mutual interests, can the world work successfully and become powerful." As we discuss in section A.2.14, anarchists stress that free agreement has to be complemented by direct democracy, or as it is usually called by anarchists, self-management, within the association itself, otherwise freedom becomes little more than picking masters. Anarchist organization is based on a massive decentralization of power back into the hands of the people, i.e., those who are directly affected by the decisions being made. To quote Proudhon, open quote, "Unless democracy is a fraud and the sovereignty of the people a joke, it must be admitted that each citizen in the sphere of his or her industry, each municipal, district, or provincial council within its own territory, should act directly and by itself in administering the interests which it includes, and should exercise full sovereignty in relation to them." End quote. It also implies a need for federalism to coordinate joint interests. For anarchism, federalism is the natural complement to self-management. With the abolition of the state, society, open quote, "can and must organize itself in a different fashion, but not from top to bottom. The future social organization must be made solely from the bottom upwards, by the free association or federation of workers, firstly in their unions, then in the communes, regions, nations, and finally in a great federation, international and universal. Then alone will be realized the true and life-giving order of freedom and the common good, that order which, far from denying, on the contrary, affirms and brings into harmony the interests of individuals and of society." End quote. Because a, open quote, "truly popular organization begins from below, and so federalism becomes a political institution of socialism, the free and spontaneous organization of popular life. Thus, libertarian socialism is federalistic in character." End quote. Therefore, anarchist organization is based on direct democracy or self-management and federalism or confederation. These are the expression and environment of liberty. Direct or participatory democracy is essential because liberty and equality imply the need for forums within which people can discuss and debate as equals, and which allow for the free exercise of what Murray Bookchin calls the creative role of dissent. Federalism is necessary to ensure that common interests are discussed and joint activity organized in a way which reflects the wishes of all those affected by them, to ensure that decisions flow from the bottom up rather than being imposed from the top down by a few rulers. Anarchist ideas on libertarian organization and the need for direct democracy and confederation will be discussed further in sections A.2.9 and A.2.11.